if you can create the right pause, the listener will fall into the pause. Then you can use their fall to continue the improvisation.
Hello dear listener, and welcome to Strolling. In this 98-minute extended episode, I'm speaking with Casey Sokol, who has decades of experience as a musician and educator. I've known him since my time as a music student in university through his evening improvisation soirees, which he organized to foster creative play and experimentation between students of music, dance, and other artistic disciplines. He's always struck me as an open-spirited person, with not just an abundance of insightful perspectives, but also quite unique ways to communicate them. Casey specifically requested me to avoid the normal quick-cut editing style I tend to do, which I think says a lot about his sensitivity to the water we're swimming in on the internet. If you notice more space and silence in the shorter snippets that I've put out, I'd be curious to hear how that makes you feel. In our exchange, what struck me was his generosity and openness to answer any of my questions about various topics, his masterful talent for teaching humorous storytelling and capturing attention, as well as his unfading enthusiasm despite some quite adverse circumstances on that day. We even hung out after recording, and he was still going, and it was great. I really appreciate the chance to speak with him, and I hope you enjoy listening. So without further ado, let's get into it.
I was an only child. I think you were an only child?
Mm-hmm.
And my parents had a really miserable relationship. And so I just kind of really learned to hunker down and be by myself. So the piano was a really great companion. And I learned to be comfortable with myself. But it also means I learned to be a loner, you know. I love being in groups with people, but I can survive very well for long periods of time without anybody.
Yeah, I've been wondering about this for myself also, just having studied music, and like you spend hours a day, or I would spend hours a day practicing an instrument and then hours a day at the computer, and I feel like I'm quite happy to just do those things, and I wonder sometimes if, or like what I might be missing, if I am missing anything in terms of just learning to interact with other people. Like I love people, I love meeting people, traveling to meet people, hanging out, recording conversations, etc. But it's like I'm quite happy with solitude.
Yeah, and I think, oh, that's interesting. Those are on timers.
Well, it's okay.
You have to get up.
We can still. Why not? Let's just. That's annoying.
Well, you could just say we're back.
We're back.
A word from our sponsors, and we're back.
Yeah. I forgot what we were talking about. Yeah.
We were talking about what it's like to be a successful, so to speak, a successful only child, where one of the possible disabilities of being alone turns out to be a positive attribute, which is you really learn to be comfortable with yourself,
comfortable with
and provide your own entertainment. And then you were starting to say something along those lines.
Just that, yeah, I feel very satisfied with that, and I've been exploring in my own life just the tension between, like, for example, with a relationship or with friendships, like not needing to seek anything outward. You know, I'm just happy to do my thing 24/7, and I do meet people anyway, but it's like, it's just interesting, and I don't know if it's peculiar to musicians or it's just us personally that we have this, and maybe other musicians,
It's peculiar to pianists.
Pianists.
Yeah, because if you're a clarinetist, like the woman on the screen back in my office, you need other people to play another part, or to play the bass line, or to play the chords.
Yeah.
Pianists tend to be loners. If anybody is going to be a loner, it's going to be a keyboard player, because we have the bass in our left hand, and we have the melody, and we have the chords. And so seriously, we practice alone, and we concertize very often alone. And many pianists actually never play chamber music. It never occurs to them to play jazz or to play, Schubert. And it can be very satisfying musically, but it is lonely.
But not for you.
No, well, I really do like people, but if I don't have people, I'm happy to be alone. But I was just writing somebody in India who I'm communicating about various things, and actually we were communicating exactly about this idea. There's a book that she was reading, and she said, I think it's better, well, she was asking, is it better to read in a group, read together with people who are interested in the same book? So I said, well, it's good to read in a group, but it has its drawbacks, because then everybody wants to put in their 2 cents. So this sentence means this, and it can be distracting to have other people's opinions flooding you when you just read the book and you want to think about it the way you want to think about it. So there's advantages to reading in a group and reading alone. But I think I was saying that ultimately I think that even though there are many people who are successful introverts and live in relative social isolation, I think that essentially we need other people. For example, biologists will look at ants and bees and things, insects like that, and they will describe an ant as not really an independent animal. It's really more like a cell of an animal, and the animal is the anthill or the beehive. That's the organism.
The collective is the organism.
That collective, what we call collective, is really just a higher being. And the same I find is true of my own functioning. Like if I look at my thoughts, of which there are many, and many of them conflict and collide, and then I look at my feelings, many of which are aligned with my thoughts, and many of which disagree with my thoughts. Like I have a thought, I should lose weight. I should go on a diet. I should have this. This will give me more energy. And I decide I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to eat that. And then only a few hours later, I feel a kind of cold sensation on my face, and I think, what is this? And then I realize my head is in the refrigerator at midnight because I'm poking around for some food. I already decided, 10 hours ago, I'm not going to do that. And I don't know who decided that, but it wasn't me. This me is hungry. I'm going to eat. So a lot of our functioning is in conflict with our other functioning. So we are also a collective. We are also like a beehive. And I think one of the opportunities and challenges of trying to become a fully functioning, integrated human being is to integrate all of those contradictory impulses. So the more we isolate ourselves socially or isolate ourselves functionally, meaning I'm just going to go with my thoughts, I'm not going to deal with feelings, they just hurt me. Or I'm just going to deal with my feelings, I'm not going to think about anything. And most people are like that. They just...
pick one and do it.
Yeah, they don't pick either. It happens to us. And we find ourselves leading a life that we haven't even considered. But I speak for myself, that I often find that I'm leading a very partial, fragmented life. And it's hard to find activities that demand reintegration. That's one of the reasons people study yoga. In fact, yoga kind of means reintegration. And I think that's one of the reasons people play music, because it demands that I think and feel and sense and move, not even only at the same time, but also in the same direction. That's one of the reasons we play music with each other. I need you. You're a bass player. I'm a flute player. Let's team up. Oh, we need a guitar player to play chords. So I think playing music is essentially a social activity, even though it can be done, in a solitary way.
It's interesting that you say you think you're living a fragmented life, whereas I see, at least my view of your career or how you spend your time, like you spend a lot of your life on music and teaching music and playing music. Perhaps that doesn't mean it's not fragmented, but it feels like you spend a lot of time on something that's important to you, and you still do. And so what makes it fragmented?
Well, first of all, I'm coming out of an earlier version of my life that was more fragmented. But also, what I mean is, after this interview, after our conversation, I will leave the room and I'll probably be totally in my head. I'll be thinking about, oh, what I should have said that, and did we talk about that?
Casey? Casey does that?
Yeah, and you're right. And then that will disappear, and I'll just be in my stomach thinking, I'm really fucking hungry. I'm gonna get some. I should get something healthy. No. I should get something like hot and rich and spicy, like Chinese food. And so, we switch from being fairly exclusively in thought to being fairly exclusively in feeling to being fairly exclusively in a love of movement or sensation. So what I'm saying is certain activities for me tend to be more satisfying because they either demand or they stimulate more parts of me at the same time. So I feel like a more whole person.
Yeah.
And why was that important? Well, I hear that you get more points. So
when you're a whole person.
Yeah.
But also I think you were one of the first people that exposed me to ideas about meditation, or at least or as somebody who was at least practicing it or just talked about it. And I heard you talk about it in an interview, and it seemed like you were comfortable with how you do that, and it serves a strong purpose in your life. And as you mentioned, yoga is meant to be integration, so it's like I sort of felt like, okay, well, he's got those things together. He doesn't worry about this kind of stuff. Look at that fragmented. And you're just like, you're an animal just like the rest of us.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't worry about that stuff. It's that I've really tried a lot of different things in an attempt to be, a more unified, more wholly functioning human being. And I've tried a lot of different techniques, like yoga, like Gurdjieff, like, whatever, meditation, different kinds of meditation. And it seems to me that each one of those ideas or techniques has as a inevitable risk that you become attached to one or another form of activity that you think is going to be the thing that is more integrated, more satisfying.
The way.
Yeah, that's a good way. I'll do that. I'll meditate every morning, or every time somebody insults me and I feel like, I'll meditate. Whereas I think life is like a perfect vehicle for meditation, or life is a perfect vehicle for living. So, all of the challenges that we meet during the day, during our life, can serve to, remind me to, come back to my own resources, come back to my own, the context in which I live, what is the hive in which I'm living, by which I don't only mean the human social context, but all the energies that are in us all the time.
Do you mind if I make a jump?
Good.
Just curious about your relationship with technology. Not that it's such, maybe it's not so much of a jump, but just it also has to do with why we feel fragmented sometimes. But I'm always curious about people from previous generations who seem to be either comfortable with technology or they're not comfortable, but they know how to, they like find their way with it, which feels like it makes sense, or they're not overwhelmed by it, or this kind of thing. Like, how would you describe your relationship with technology?
That is a little too open-ended for me to approach, but I guess the first technology that I became aware of was my lungs, followed by my tongue, and followed it later in life by my thumb and fingers. And everything else really seems like an extension of that technology.
Ideally.
So I like cell phones because they allow me to text with you, and text with my wife, and text with people in India. They allow me to write a score on the computer I wrote a whole book of piano music, and it really looks like a very professional printed book of music. Everything is just beautiful and communicates quite perfectly what I set about to communicate. I don't like, there's things about technology that bother me, but it just behooves me to have a relationship with them, like AI. I'm very suspicious of AI and what it might do to society and relationships and all that. But I met one of the people who's a very one of the administrators or creative people in, do you know Claude AI?
It's from Google? Or?
No, it's not Google. It's
I've heard of the name anyway, yeah.
I can't remember the parent company at the moment. It's actually the most powerful word-based AI. Doesn't deal that well with graphics yet. But I just wanted to have a relationship with it, so I wrote something that I wrote on the board in one of my classes. And I said, what do you think of this? And it says, a woman without her man is nothing. And
That's what you wrote?
I wrote that on the board for a class, to stimulate a class, and I put it into AI. A woman without her man is nothing. And I said to AI, so what do you think of that? And it wrote a beautiful essay. It said, well, it's actually very demeaning to women. It denigrates, it makes them into just dependent beings that they need a man to. And I thought that was really a good answer. Then I wrote the same exact sentence. A woman without her man is nothing, except I wrote it with punctuation. A woman dash without her comma, man is nothing.
Uh-huh.
In other words, a woman without her, man is nothing.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't speak it, I just wrote in punctuation into the same sentence, just to see if it would get it. And it got it perfectly, and it wrote another essay, really. And it said, this sentence says basically the opposite. And then just to test
and it made a relation with what you...
And it made a relationship with the first one. And then I just wrote, without any explanation, I just, in uppercase letters, bravo, with 2 exclamation marks, meaning as if I was talking to a friend, and I wrote, good for you, you got it. And not only did it get it, but it got my bravo, it got what I was saying, which was, you know, you're a pretty clever, I don't know, pretty clever app. I don't know if they're called apps. And it said, yes, punctuation can make all the difference in our understanding, or the equivalent of punctuation in speech, which are your pauses and your accents. So if I were going to say those 2 sentences, I would say, a woman without her man is nothing, or a woman without her man is nothing. And it got the difference just with punctuation.
So what was the lesson that you were trying to teach your students by writing this? Or is that the same, did the AI come to the same conclusion that you were trying to get across to your students?
Yes, but I wrote this on the board for my students. I came in before they came in. And I wrote it on the board, and then I left. And I waited till they were all in, and I peeked through the window, and sure enough, they were pointing to it and buzzing to each other. And then I walked in the room and I said, okay, let's get going. And I started immediately with some Carnatic rhythm. And I said, let's look at this as a structure. And they were going for a little while, and then finally one of the women said, sir, did you write that on the board? Did you write that sentence on the board? And I said, what? And she said, the sentence behind you. And I said, oh yeah. Oh, but that doesn't have anything to do with the class. Let's just continue. We're going to continue with this exploration of Indian rhythmic techniques. And then some guy in the class said, why did you write that? And I said, I just read it last night and it seemed like there was some truth in it and I didn't want to forget it. It seemed like a very nicely organized sentence. So they said, you read that somewhere? I said, yes, it's a book on contemporary sociology. I don't remember. It just seemed like a good sentence. And they said, you wrote it the way it was printed? And I said, yeah, word for word. A woman without her man is nothing. Period. I said, I forgot the period. As a matter of fact, I didn't put in any of the punctuation. And they said, what punctuation? So I said, okay, well, after woman there's a dash, but it's just at the dash. And after man there's a comma. And then some woman said, that's not what the sentence says. You didn't say it right. I said, you mean my performance wasn't good? And some guy in the class said, yeah, right. Yeah, you didn't say it right. You said a woman without her man is nothing. But the sentence says a woman without her man is nothing. And I said, it's the same sentence. Same words, same everything. And of course the class started to really get agitated and object. Says, no, you're not saying it like she said it. The way she said it, it means something else. So finally, they said, a woman, without da-da-da-da. So it went on a little bit and I finally said, so you're saying that phrasing is actually part of the meaning of a sentence. It's not just the words. And the class went, yeah, right. And I said, that's such a great segue into today's theme, because the theme of today's class is phrasing in improvised music. And I said, let's go to it. And of course the class laughed and they realized that it was a ruse. But of course I had their attention, and it's a 3-hour class and they were just on for 3 hours.
Where did you learn to troll like this?
You have to. If you're going to teach a 3-hour class, one of the things you have to learn, unless you don't give a shit about whether they're paying attention to you or not, you have to capture their interest. Not in an aggressive way. In this case, like in most cases, the way I do it is not by putting a demand on them, but by bringing them into a situation. Like, I grew up in New York City, and as a young kid, I would take a lot of subway cars, and some of the subways, especially in Brooklyn, the size of the opening of the station is just a little bit bigger than the train. And the trains would come roaring by, and for a little kid, it's really kind of terrifying. But what I always noticed was, as the last car of the train went, so whoosh, I felt like sucked into the space. It was just a psychological thing. I mean, of course, there's a breeze that's actually activated at the end of the train. So there is a kind of vacuum there, but it was psychologically, I felt like, whoa. And I realized that negative space is really important. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony begins, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. It could have gone, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. Right. But that space, that nothing, is something. And it's the same thing that astrophysicists are realizing now, is that, first of all, empty space is not empty at all. And that there's a force that is not produced by, but is synonymous with empty space. And that's not really a recent discovery of astrophysicists. That's all the way back in the Kabbalah, the ancient Hebraic esoteric knowledge that the universe was created, they say. I mean, it's more complicated than this, but the Lord, the God, basically inhaled, is a way of saying it, and by doing that, created a vacuum, and that brought forth the universe, which is basically what astrophysicists are saying in a very different way now.
So I understand now why you had an issue with the way I edit my videos, because I've removed the space, so it's like Beethoven without the rest, you know? It's just
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, we get each other. That's really good.
yeah. But so how do you translate that into a teaching device? Like, it's enough to, I mean, it's one thing to know that, or to be aware of the phenomenon that space can maybe support the non-space, or can draw people in, but like, how do you come up with, like, did you just steal that from someone, or do you have a way to arrive at those kind of devices where you, because you can't also do the same thing in every class, right? People are going to be onto you and then they'll tune out, so you kind of have to do it differently, I guess, every time.
That's right. You can't create interest by creating a confusion or a vacuum, or so sometimes you create interest. Are you talking about pedagogy now?
Well, sure. I'm just fascinated that you're obviously very deliberately doing whatever you were doing there when you were writing that phrase, and I'm just curious about it. Like, what do you have to practice in order to come up with something like that?
Wow, I don't know that it's a practice. First of all, you have to love teaching. Teaching has to come out of love. And I don't mean romantic love, and I don't mean only to be interested in teaching, but if you want to communicate something, if you want to convey or transmit something, you have to create an environment in the room where there's a liveliness, and if there's any, I don't know exactly how to describe it. You just have to notice what gets people's attention. What are people interested in? People are interested in, I don't want to try to summarize that. So I don't think there's a technique, but because I've tried many things. I mean, sometimes you could just walk into a room and go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then somebody's going to say, wow, what are you doing? I was going to say, well, first of all, it's a cross rhythm of 4 against 3, and I'm using syllables that are part of an Indian rhythmic pedagogy that's existed for a very, very long time, thousands of years, and blah, blah, blah. And then they go, could we study that? And I go, yeah, it would be excellent for you to study it, because once you learn to have rhythms in your mouth and in your body, once you can feel a 5, then you can hear the 5. So if you get some music that's in 5s, you don't have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can already feel it, because it's in your body. So the pedagogy that I've used for teaching free improvisation, I've taught it for just about 50 years at York University, and it's always seemed to me to be a contradiction in terms to teach freedom. Because if you're teaching, you're essentially, you've got a curriculum, which means the definition of curriculum is you've got a course and people are following a roundabout or something. And if they're following you, they're not learning to be creative. They're not learning to be free. So that contradiction has kept me alive and interested in, for 5 decades. How can you teach people to be independent and free, and not just to get caught up in memes and templates and autofill? But also, it's the same problem that Zen masters have, and swamis and yogis, and you want people to learn to be free. How do you teach freedom? If you're teaching it, then you're not activating their own sense of independent intelligence. So it's the same problem that every spiritual teacher has, and every teacher of improvisation has, especially free improvisation. So you're asking good questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've met some of your students, and it seems like you've helped a lot of people improvise. So you've managed to limit the way that a structure might inhibit some people from their learning process in terms of improvisation. So
say that again.
I can't.
No, I think I know what you were saying, and I think it's a really interesting thought.
Because you'd really have, like, it's like what you said is that if you're going to do this in the context of an institution, then there has to be a structure and a course that people will follow in order to arrive at some place where they're not following something. And they're
Right.
just
How do you give homework?
Yeah.
So, with each obstacle that I encountered, especially in the universities, the obstacles of homework, testing, I've tried to turn it around to my advantage. Like, how can I use the fact that I can get them to do homework because I have to grade them, and not use it as a threat, but just, here's the fact. I have to give you a grade. That's my job. So here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it in a way that helps you to become the kind of musician you'd like to become. So my tests and my assignments and my projects have all been an opportunity for me to find even more appropriate ways to have the students engage in activities that are learning activities. So, sometimes I feel like the university is really a very tough place to do anything creative or anything meaningful. But exactly the things that make it tough are the things that you can turn around, kind of like judo. Somebody's attacking you, so you can say...
If you have the mindset for that, yeah.
Well, that's been my pleasure, and if it wasn't, yeah. I would have quit a long time ago.
Yeah. Did you study judo? Did you study judo?
No.
Okay.
But as soon as you're playing piano, even if it's Chopin, you're studying judo. If you're playing dum 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 dum, da dum dum dum, just that little pause that I was talking about before. You make a pause, or like when the train passes, if you can create the right pause, the listener will fall into the pause. Then you can use their fall to continue the improvisation.
Wow. I've never thought about piano that way.
No, it's like music. No, it's Beethoven. It's it's not just free improvisation. It's Vietnamese music. It's every musician in every culture has come upon that idea, and painters come upon it too. You don't fill the whole canvas with buildings and people, and you need space there too. Space is not just nothing. Space is the presence of emptiness. Like a rest in music is not the absence of something. It's the presence of nothing.
So to go back to the...
Did you understand what I said? I know you have an idea. You wanted to get right to it.
Oh, man.
It's the same thing, but it's the opposite.
I think I understood what you're saying. But yeah, I'm just going to say my idea now. This is...
Because otherwise you'll forget it. I get it.
Well, I can... But it's... What is he... To go back to the editing of the space out that I do... which you remarked as disturbing, and I think that it is. I wouldn't use such a harsh word, but I can see what you mean. And you obviously understand that a lot of the videos that are being produced on the internet now, especially like this sort of TikTok genre, is like it's that velocity. And do you have an opinion about that, or is it just something you're disconnected from?
My opinion is that if the way TikTok editing was the way you lived your life, you would have to change your life. You wouldn't want to be with your girlfriend in Germany and then you're in another, I'm exaggerating, but I'm not exaggerating. That kind of discontinuity, and mind you, discontinuity is an essential element in continuity, right? Da-da-da-dum, discontinue. that discontinuity is what makes the continuity as powerful as it is. So you can't create continuity by just keep going, keep going, keep going. So discontinuity is a member of the tribe. But in the TikTok videos, what you're eliminating is the natural flow of movement and speech, the natural flow of ideas and feelings. And if you had a relationship, like when you go to Germany and you're with your girlfriend, if you had an evening with her in TikTok style, it would drive you, I think, it would drive you fucking nuts. Would you stop doing that and just sit here with me and talk continuously and not, anyway.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I guess it is also just the way a lot of people learn stuff now. I feel, I understand that young people are now treating TikTok as the internet. So when they want to figure things out, they go there and it's explained in a certain way. And like, so it's sort of like a kind of silent change in how society works in the way that maybe.
Well, some TikTok videos are great. They are actually very helpful. They're very funny. Some of them are very insightful. I was just referring to a particular editing style that's in a lot of TikTok. Yeah. No, I think TikTok videos, some of them are really funny. Some of them are wonderfully sexy. And you know, there are all kinds of different things. They're fun to look at.
Right.
I was just talking about that particular style where that's not how people talk, and you know.
Yeah, I guess this is just something I have to examine in myself. I don't really like things to be that way, but I've heard this point of view that if you don't collapse the silence in the videos, then people just tune out, because apparently that's how people pay attention now. And of course, that's not everybody. I mean, you know, the world is diverse. So, but for some reason, I feel like, okay, it makes sense to do it that way.
Well, that's a chicken and the egg thing, you know. That's how people are. So that's how they make. That's how people will make their TikTok videos. But I think it goes the other way.
Yeah. Can you take it if you want?
Hello, is the president of Ecuador?
So jumping again. You told me about your WordPress website, which you now want to move to your Squarespace website. Like
just a domain name.
Yeah, but you are documenting your stuff online.
My teaching ideas. I only have one video sitting there because I never made it a goal to have a lot of videos.
Don't see yourself as trying to be creative in that medium of the web, or trying to express something at some point.
For me to do that, and that gets back to your question about technology, for me to be creative in my web design, in my presentation of the materials, I would have to really woodshed technology.
Skills.
Yeah. I'd have to get some web skills. Yeah. And I'd sort of be glad to do that if I had a mentor.
Right.
If I had a teacher who said, well, if you want to, okay, first thing we got to do is animation. Second thing we got to do is video editing. And, you know, you might be that mentor, right?
Right.
But even though I like technology, I'm not interested in becoming an adept in it, because I've gone down that path a number of times in a number of ways, like really trying to learn different kinds of synthesis, you know, audio synthesis, and it takes a lot of time, and then you go down various rabbit holes, and then to get good at this, you really have to do this, and then this, and before you know it, you're not doing what you want to do anymore. You're doing technology. So it's
yeah, I feel that.
It's a little bit like I got a new girlfriend, and she loves when I rub the back of her neck. And she loves when I kiss her on the earlobe. I wonder, like, are there a lot of nerve endings in the back of the neck? Like, what are the best places to touch my girlfriend? Then I start looking at it. I get a book on anatomy and kinesiology, and then I look at hormones and body structure. And then before you know it, I'm not even dealing with a live body anymore. I'm now immersed in a book on, you know, So, if you know what I mean, you know,
Well-
it
well
starts
said,
with a
yeah.
love of X and it turns into a study of Y. And then sometimes you never get back. A lot of jazz students in the 70s really loved what I was doing with free improvisation. And you know, they'd poke into it and then they'd say, no, I have to learn to play jazz properly first. I have to learn all my scales and chords, and I have to learn these.
Before you do free
500
improvisation, you need to do jazz.
Before you do that, you got to learn this. And I'd say, sure, that's one way to do it. But most of them would never come back because they'd learn to be a good enough jazz pianist or jazz saxophonist or whatever, and they'd get caught in that. Now that I realize I can play like this, I can maybe get a job at Grossman's, or maybe I can get a gig at the Jazz Bistro or whatever, and now they become a jazz musician. They're not going to give that up to learn a whole new thing, which is how to be original, how to be a creative artist at the piano, because you're not going to make money doing that. And I'm the first person to admit that you're not going to make money playing stuff that's not popular. So I can play in a style that makes it sound popular, but what really is going to be popular is playing groove music. And that music is wonderful, but it's not what I want to do.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that music can become its own meme. And then you're just playing variations of a habituated set of sensations and impressions.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. That's not what I want to do in my life.
I think I heard Jacob Collier talk about this, where he was making a distinction between recreating something that you enjoy versus just trying to discover something new.
Right.
Something that struck me quite hard when I heard that, because I feel I've also been like when I improvise, I feel like most of the time I enjoy it and I do something new ends up happening somehow, but I observe this tendency to try and like do that thing or like just go back to something, and
we all want to go back to something.
I try to fight the automation of that as it happens, but yeah, I have to make that a conscious process.
Yeah, but the more you fight it, that's not a good strategy, I would say. To fight something that's a habit really makes the habit in a way stronger, because you can't proceed negatively. You can't educate yourself to play by saying not that, not that, not that, not that. You have to be attracted to something, not avoiding this, avoiding that, because then what are you doing? What you're doing consists of is not doing. So it's like trying to stop your thought. When somebody first encounters that idea in meditation, try to stop thinking. And a lot of people are plagued by excessive thinking. They're trapped in their own thinking process. But you can't address that, in my opinion anyway, and in my experience, you can't address that by trying to stop your thinking. That's a negative approach to it, and all it does is reinforce or bring more energy to the problem. But if you could redirect your thought to something positive, or something that you really love, then maybe you wouldn't be trapped in the way you are.
We need a 301 for the mind. Right. Your history with music and different styles, like you studied Indian music, I think South Indian?
I did study South Indian music.
Okay, and then you have like your classical experience and then free improvisation, and maybe you've done some jazz stuff and...
Yeah, some jazz stuff, some composition. And I also had, really good experiences with Indonesian music, African music, but not to the point of acquiring expertise.
Sure, yeah. So in your improvisation, like how do you get around this, what we were sort of talking about, where maybe you get into a mode or doing things in a certain, not about style necessarily, because it's fine if you want to play in a style, but like how do you avoid like not being inhibited by the, I don't know, any kind of pressure to conform? By like, if you just touch on some kind of jazz things, but then you move on to something else, like you don't feel like any pressure to stay in that place, in that context of a specific vocabulary of music, or do you just mix everything together and it all works out somehow? Do you care what other people think, or do you care what the listener thinks, or in your improvisation specifically?
Well, I care very much how the listener feels and what they're experiencing, but I can't I can't think, oh, they'll like this. That's a sort of a cheap way to play, and you wind up playing health food store music or something.
Food store music. Whoa,
you know, the kind of cassettes that they sell in health food stores.
I need to hear
you know,
this.
relaxing music that's often full of drones, and it could be very beautiful, but it's not the kind of music I'm interested in. I have people who do that, friends who compose meditation music, and some of it's quite interesting, but not musically interesting. But anyway, that's another question. I don't try to avoid anything.
Yeah.
If I find myself playing a 2-5-1 cadence, or if I find myself in the Lydian mode, or in 4/4 time, or if I find that I'm playing, you know, a dominant flat 9 chord, I don't say, uh-oh, I shouldn't do that. Because the whole point is to proceed by affirmation rather than by negation. So, I don't mean this in the sense of the world is my oyster. I mean everything that I've learned is part of my means to express myself. So just as I'm not trying to avoid certain words because I've used them before, as I speak to you, I try to use the words to say something that's appropriate to this exchange and appropriate to what you just asked me. So I'm trying to use my words meaningfully and creatively. Similarly, in music, I might find myself using dissonant chromatic clusters, or I might find myself using beautiful voicings of major chords.
Yes.
It depends on, it really depends on the moment.
I think it's interesting when you talk about music, you say you find yourself, as if it's sort of happening, and you don't say I try to or I decide to. You just say, oh, this is happening.
Yeah, I think that creating free music is a kind of it's not really a collision, but it's an integration of serendipity and control. So that I'm trying to exercise control where it seems appropriate, and where my ego and my capacity for control seems to be needed or wanted, but I'm also interested in the loss of control to see what will happen which I think is what you do when you travel. There's a certain amount of intention, like I'm going to go to Berlin. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know who I'm going to meet on the street, but I do know that I'm not going to try to rush to get to this place and that place, because I want to see what happens on the way. The traveling is the destination. So I don't know if I have to say more than that, but it's I mean, one of the techniques, or one of the stories that I don't even know if I should go there, but everything has a story. So there are examples that I can give where, you know, to show how somebody like Frederick Rzewski, he's the only person that I ever went purposely to go and study improvisation with, because I admired his capacity to improvise. Very well trained pianist and composer. And when he really lets loose in an improvisation, it's amazing what he can do and where he goes. And so I went to Yellow Springs, Ohio to study with him. He was there in residence with his group Musica Elettronica Viva. And he didn't want to teach me. He's a bit of a curmudgeon, but...
You showed up and then he said he didn't want to teach you?
He didn't really know that I was coming there to study with him.
Oh, well.
So I was there, and I said, I really would love to either have some lessons with you or just talk to you about improv. Anyway, he didn't want to teach. But, and I played some improvisations for him. And he said, "That's great. What do you want to study with anybody for? That you're just going to get filled with ideas that are not your own." And I said, "Well, I understand that, but there's some way that you're improvising that is of great interest to me, and I'd like to know a little bit more about it." Anyway, I finally got him to reveal one of the approaches. Maybe it's his main approach, I don't know, but one of the approaches he uses, and I'll just give you a schematic of it because I think it will clarify what I mean by trying to harmonize the impulses of control as a musician and the impulse of taking advantage of serendipity, taking advantage of accident and association and all that. So he said, "Well, I might start with a very simple idea, like I'm going to hit a note and then I make an interval with another note or whatever, and then that forms an idea. And I might play that idea for a while, and then I might add something to that. So when this happens, I will do this. And now that becomes a more complicated idea. And then I will build and make an even more complicated idea. If this happens in this range of the piano and on a black note, I will do this." So I wind up making a bunch of rules for myself as I go along.
That's his strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
The rules are not made up before I start to play. That's part of my improvisation. So by the time I get to rule number 4, it's a pretty complex improvisation, and he has a very good mind. So when I say complex, it's pretty complex. When I get to stage 5, it's just about all I can handle to keep it together. And I'm improvising with a lot of very rich materials. I'm in the middle of a minestrone soup of materials. And it's about all I can control. And then I go to stage 6, where I undertake to make one more adjustment or one more variation in what I'm doing. And that is calculated to be beyond my control, beyond my ability to control the process and the outcome of the improvisation. And so I gradually have to let go. I have to admit I can't control this. I still try to control it, but all kinds of accidents are happening both under my fingers and in my mind, and I realize I'm not totally in control, but I'm having a good time. I mean, I'm composing and improvising as much as I can, and I finally just realize by small increments that I can't persuade myself that I'm really controlling everything, so I just start to let go. But I'm letting go in the middle of a rich set of materials that I've constructed over 5 stages of improvisation. So I'm not just throwing the baby out. I'm just...
Yeah, I was going to say, where does it end? Because he's lost control. Does he try to get it back, or you just... How does he finish?
Well, he's participating in something that I would say is a kind of a... I don't know how to say it in any other way. It's somewhere between control and loss of control. Somewhere between serendipity, taking advantage of accident, and being intentional. So it's a kind of a blend of intention and accident that in the hands of a creative individual can be very fruitful, because it's neither control nor uncontrolled. So a lot of people I see approaching, a concert of free improvised music, they just start flailing. They just go, blah, 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 it doesn't matter, I'll just do anything.
They go right to stage 6.
Right, which is not really stage 6, because it's not based on intention or control. It's not based on a set of materials that they've developed. And that sort of bores me. It's nice to hear for a while, but it doesn't go anywhere. It just starts in the middle of chaos, keeps going chaotically, and I don't mean to put it down, because a lot of musicians are very sincere in their desire to play that way, but it doesn't hold my interest because there's no form to it And by form, I don't mean AABA, you know. There are forms that are much more subtle and more interesting than block forms.
Yeah.
So how to combine, or how, not combine, that's not the right word, but how to integrate intention and accident is one of the themes that keeps me questioning about playing music, keeps me interested in the process of creative development. The end. However, chapter 2.
I was just taking a breath. Yeah.
I was just thinking of an interesting TikTok way to Anyway, I'm sorry.
It's all right, it's all right.
You'll edit me out
You're
anyway.
You're allowed to make jokes, Casey. More than welcome.
It's so interesting because my energy is so jangly right now from, that lack of sleep and spending an hour inside the MRI. Have you ever had an MRI?
No.
Oh my God. You get like 5 minutes of and then it stops. Oh God. And then this thing goes and then that stops after 5 minutes, and then it goes and you think, what the hell are they doing? I'm just here for this thing in my leg. And it's the most varied noises you can imagine, but all at an octave relationship. So it'll be, all of that.
Oh, you're killing me.
Just jumps the octave.
Oh my God.
And then when you're totally exhausted and you're cramped up in this little tube that they put you in, and there's headphones so you can hear what he says. All you can hear is 5 more minutes. Did he say 5 more minutes? And then I don't know why he say 5 more minutes, because then he does it again. 5 more minutes.
What a composition.
I thought, this is what a way to spend the early morning hours.
For what it's worth, I don't think it would be obvious for anyone who's heard what you've previously said that you had done that overnight tonight, and that you haven't slept today. Yeah, so congrats. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just a lack of sleep, it's also what an assault.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't get out of the building. I was trying to get it's funny. The doors were locked to get out. I would understand being locked to get in, so I couldn't get out of the building. I thought, well, the Uber's coming to pick me up, and how am I going to let him know where I am? Anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
Man. Well, there's an interesting thread there also, just about being sensitive to sound in like noisy spaces, but maybe
the next time, or I guess the first time you ever have an MRI, send me a message. I'm just curious what your reaction will be.
I will put that on my list.
You'll remember, because it's such a weird experience.
Yeah.
To be cooped up in this little tube, which is very claustrophobic for many people.
You talked about mentorship earlier a bunch of times. Like, is that well, I mean, you mentioned this person as a kind of teacher you wanted to receive lessons from, but you also mentioned earlier that you're not really teaching here at this university, but you're around and sometimes you meet with students who need guidance on various things. So is that something you deliberately try to do, or do you want to be a mentor, or is it just a fortunate circumstance that's happening?
Well, I do get some real satisfaction from helping people. It doesn't mean being their mentor. Sometimes it's just driving them to the doctor, or giving them some advice about, should I take this pill or that pill?
Okay.
But in areas where I do have some training, some sensitivity, some expertise, like in music, it's not that I feel the need to, but I enjoy having an opportunity to share it with people, because what else is it for? You know, if I know it and I don't share it, what use is it? It's already served its usefulness to me, and I've benefited really so greatly from other people's hard-won knowledge or technique or well, there's other kinds of knowledge that we don't necessarily call knowledge, but you know, their perceptions, their maturity. And so I think that's one of the things that we do for each other. Sometimes somebody asks a question on Facebook and says, "Question to the hive." I never knew what they were saying until I realized they mean all the other readers, right?
The ant colony.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant, right? And I think that our own minds are like an ant colony too, right? Because we have more than one brain. We have an emotional brain, a motor brain, a sensory brain, an intellect, and each brain has its own sensitivity and its own intellect, so to speak, its own intelligence. So we are all by ourselves, each one of us, a hive. That's what I was trying to say before. I am an anthill.
Right.
There's the name of my next and my first book. I am an anthill.
You haven't written a book yet?
Dear Mom. Did I ever write a book?
It's surprising that you haven't written one.
No, I know, because everybody writes a book. No, no.
Well, no, just because you I don't know, you just have a way of saying things and being and teaching, and so I feel like it would just...
The classes were my book.
True, yeah.
And the website it's not meant to be a book starting with page 1. The website is intended to be more like a library. Like when you go to a library, you just sometimes, I don't know if you ever do that, you just go to the most unlikely section of the library, pick a book and think, fucking Russian wars in the Ukraine. And you just read like half a paragraph, you go, wow, I didn't know that. And then you realize this is a good book to read. And there are hundreds of thousands of books here to read, and I can't read them all. So you just start in whatever corner you're in and learn something about it. Yeah. And that's the way I feel like my website is intended to just find a little corner of what I've learned and share it with people who might be interested in it. And it's not meant to be chronological or incrementally developmental. It's not meant to be a course, but you just kind of poke in and see if it interests you, and then you poke in somewhere else.
Yeah. I also heard you say here that if you stop doing this professionally, you would just like work in a supermarket as a cashier or something like that. You were making a point about just not wanting to deal with maybe bureaucracy or like structure of the institution or whatever. But
yeah, it's more than that, and I don't want to sound dogmatic, but I think music is, this is going to sound dogmatic, and I don't mean it like it's going to sound, but I think music is something, I don't want to use the word sacred, but it's connected to
I think it's sacred.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, music is sacred, but it's also commercial, and it's also many other things. But it's not like I don't want to stoop to making my music commercial, because I think commercial music has a place. This group of composers that I visit and that I'm presenting to soon, called Toronto Ravel, those people, I admire them. They're trying to make a living by composing music. What an unlikely thing to do. What a difficult thing to do. They're composing for film or for television commercials or for dance or for whatever. That's really difficult. But I don't want to compose or improvise so that I can make an income from it. I have made a lot of money improvising, but it's not something that I set about to do. Like, I'd like to have this job doing this or doing that. And it's simply because I don't want to be... This is the president of El Ecuador. High School president has been assassinated. No more country. So I have made money composing and improvising and also playing repertoire. And it's nice, but it's nice to be compensated. But I don't like the idea of organizing my life in such a way that I'll play this for you so that you'll pay me. I'd rather just play for you, and then you could just pay me for doing nothing.
Right.
Yeah, I don't
separate it from the music making. Yep.
Yeah, there's something about it. It's not that I'm upset by money, although I do have trouble with money. With taking money. It would be much nicer to just. I don't know what kind of a system we could live under, because barter is pretty sloppy.
People talk about gift economies now.
Yeah. I mean, there are ways to do it, but you're still living in a society that is organized in another way. And it's true that I have had for many, many years the luxury of not having to think about playing music for a living, because I've been on salary at York University. That's why I never really I'm anxious. I'm never anxious to really talk about the relationship between making music and money, because I'm not really in that situation where I have to make money. What can I do? What are my skills? So rather than, I never wanted to be a gigging musician, spend the night playing T for Two and variations on.
Sure, yeah. I mean, this is kind of why, of course, yeah, you want to be creative, right? And I don't know if you were being metaphorical when you said grocery store cashier, but I just thought, and I don't want to sound like demeaning about that as a choice of work for anyone, but it was just interesting to think of you in that role, and do you mean you'd actually be satisfied with that in some way, or you were just making a joke maybe, and I'm being too
No, I wasn't making a joke. When I go to a grocery store or any store, I'm aware that people don't even look at the cashier. They just take their stuff, they give money to a hand that's over there, or they put their money down, or they put their credit, and there's no relationship. And I always try to engage the person.
Yeah, I would love to actually see how you would just do something with each customer, and of course the line would get longer because of that, or it would take more time, but it would be great, it'd be worth the wait, because there's just something cool happening there.
Yeah, I'm sure you do the same thing, because for a person who travels just for the pleasure of meeting people, you probably have developed a real skill, and it's one skill that a lot of people don't have any truck with, is talking to a stranger in a way that doesn't make them feel threatened, and that gets them to immediately trust you and open up. And I think that's a magical thing.
I never thought about that as a skill.
Oh my God, people just don't have that skill. Even the skill that you're exercising now, which is persuading somebody to talk to you.
Yeah.
You could have been much more, much less interesting to speak to. Even though you're not speaking much, you just speak just enough and ask questions, and it's an inviting situation. And it's genuinely a skill. So I often imagine myself being the Uber driver or being the cashier, and instead of just treating each customer as like, okay, what do you got? Broccoli. Just talk to them like, looks like you're going to make a dish,
Yeah.
And then or sometimes I'll just, buy 7 items, and I'm leaving, at the cashier, and I'm saying, what do you think I'm going to make tonight?
I love that.
Or what could you make with this? Or that's another way,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Because, for example, I was in a Chinese grocery, a local grocery, and I wanted to get some potatoes to bake. And I saw these beautiful purple potatoes. So I thought, well, I'll try this. I brought them up to the counter, and it was a teenage girl there minding the store, I guess, for her parents. And she looked at me and said, you know what these are? And I said, purple potatoes. And she said, but do you know what we do with them? You know how the Chinese people prepare them? And I said, well, I don't know. What do you do? So she said, well, we boil them together with rice. And we boil them until they disintegrate. Ooh. And the flesh inside is not like your sweet potatoes, because it was advertised as a sweet potato. That's why I got them. It's not orange or yellow the way yams and sweet potatoes are. They are white sweet potatoes, and they're quite sweet, and Chinese people will put them into the rice as they're cooking the rice and let them disintegrate, and then that makes the rice into a sweet dessert. Ooh. And I said, wow, I never would have guessed that. I said, I'll try that tonight. And she said, good, let me know how it comes out. So, you know, there's a person just saying something very ordinary for herself, but having the interest to speak to a stranger, a customer, and telling them something, you know, I mean, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that.
It's enriching.
It's really enriching. And I think we miss so many of those opportunities in our day.
Yeah, it's all around us, isn't it? Yeah, we're just kind of leaving it on the table. We are, I mean, it's a habit to leave it on the table, but it's there. We try to get it. Yeah. How are you feeling? It's been 87 minutes recording.
Well, we didn't get to the main topic yet.
We didn't get to the main topic now.
Can you tell me what the main topic is?
I thought you knew. I'm, for whatever reason, preoccupied, interested, lightly studying this phenomenon that's happening with social divisions and people being in information bubbles and like different versions of the same reality happening now in a political sense, but in other senses as well. So like influenced by social media, that genre of stuff. So do you relate to that in any way? Do you think about that? Do you think about misinformation and understanding truth, reality, or through dialogue and misconceptions people have based on their bubbles and things like that?
God, another gigantic question. Well, on the one hand, information bubbles and social bubbles, social isolation of, you know, one group isolating from another because of preference for certain ideas or certain expressions of ideas. It's very sad that it's just a mental construct that separates Pakistan from India, or that separates, you know, Jews from Arabs, or that separates Republicans from Democrats. It's not a real separation at all. It's just a difference in approach, or a difference in ideas, or a difference in the way people express their ideas. So a lot of that stuff is not real. It's just imaginary differences. And from that point of view, it's sad that people live so much in their imaginations that they can be persuaded that another group is really different, so much so that it would be better if they didn't exist. And then that leads to social and political decisions that could result in violence, or those thoughts, you know, how a group is disenfranchised by another group simply because where they put their commas, so to speak. That same process is also happening inside myself. And I think that is a process that's happening inside each person. that one part violently disagrees with another part. I made a joke before about, one part decides, I'm not going to eat after 10 o'clock at night. I'm not going to eat after 6 o'clock. That's it. I don't want to go to sleep with a full stomach. I don't want to stuff my gut, And then all of a sudden, I don't even know what time it is, but I just find the skin on my face is really cold. Why? Holy shit, my head's in the refrigerator and I'm rummaging.
You find yourself.
Looking through, I find myself. And that kind of internal fragmentation is actually quite serious because it's very pervasive. It's ubiquitous, I think, in the culture, that we all experience that kind of inner fragmentation. One part decides, yeah, I'm going to love my neighbor, except that fucking guy who lives 2 doors down. I don't think he's my...
Not the neighbor 2 doors down.
He's not my next door neighbor.
So, only love your next door neighbor.
Right. So people don't realize how contradictory they are within their own set of values that they purport to be very clear about. And that leads to the next door neighbor, the next city, the next religion, the next everything. And people have ideas and assumptions about what's going on around them that are not based on what we might call reality. But then when you start to look at that, we don't have a commonly accepted reality. And that's something that's being explored now by not only quantum physicists, but neuroanatomists, that we don't really know what the other people think. In fact, we don't know what we think. And we don't understand what we mean by thinking. And so actually we're in the middle of a vast sea of unknowing, and what fills the gap of unknowing. If we get back to the idea of empty space or silence, what fills the gap socially and intellectually are assumptions and habits. And so our life, I think, I speak for myself, the gaps in my own understanding result in, are filled with habituated thoughts and reactions. And a lot of my life is just too much rooted in those two things and all the whole family of experiences that are part of habits and reactions. Instead of responding to my life and the things around me, I react to it. And instead of trying to be intentional about my relationship to people and to art and to music, or instead of, being intentional, I find it that I'm reacting on the basis of mechanical habits, which are old, just keep living in the past. And how to live really in the moment. And if I can digress for a minute about that word moment, because that's the word that so many students come to our pre-course interview, right? I always interview people before they take the courses. They're all elective courses.
Your courses or just the whole...
No, the improvisation courses are electives. And even though I write a very clear blurb in the course calendar, people still don't really know what I mean by free improvisation. You can describe it, you can whatever. And so I say, well, why do you want to improvise? Why do you want to improvise freely, like outside of any known idiom? And they say, well, when you improvise, you're really in the moment. You're not just acting on the basis of what you've already done before. You're not repeating the past. Each moment is really fresh. And I might tell them any one of a number of stories to see how they react to that. One one thing I say is, when I finally moved to Rosedale, a friend's house came up for rent, so I was renting a really big, beautiful house in Rosedale on a corner lot, and I had a big bay window. And I would stand in front of the bay window and I could see people down the block this way, down the block that way, and these people were walking towards my house, and these people were walking away from my house. It was like these people were the future. I was going to see them right in front of my house in maybe 20 seconds, and these people had already been there, and they're the past. I'm not going to see them again. So there was like a window of time. And but when I was living in Buffalo in a little apartment, when I was going to school there, I had a window that was like 8 inches wide, and if somebody passed in front of it, I couldn't even tell it was a person. All of a sudden the window would turn yellow, probably because somebody was wearing a yellow raincoat. I would just see yellow and then no yellow. Or I would see a couple of stripes and then no stripes, because the window was very narrow. So there'd be no past, there'd be no future, the way I could see it through my bay window in Rosedale. I would stand in front of the bay window and I thought, wow, this is a window where there's a little throw of time. Or maybe I'm in the moment and I'm seeing the moment, but I can see into the past and into the future in relation to who's in front of my house. That's the kind of moment I want, not the kind of moment that disappears. But I would give them another example of somebody being just really in the moment and say, is this the kind of moment you want? There's a guy named Clive Wearing. He was a very well-known, very well-liked British composer, conductor, pianist, musicologist, very talented musical guy. 1985, he comes down with a certain kind of encephalitis that infected his brain and ate away most of his hippocampus, which is where your memories are stored and where new ones are formed. And over a short period of time, his hippocampus was just about gone, literally eaten away by the virus. Couldn't remember his past. If somebody put a cup of water in front of him, he would know it was a cup of water, but he had no idea how it got there. His memory was maybe 5 minutes long, sometimes not even that. Couldn't remember anybody or anything from his past, but he kept all his musical abilities. That was in a different brain organ. So he could play a piece of music, but he had no idea how he got to the piano or why he was at the piano. He didn't remember anybody except his wife, who he loved really dearly. Now, on the positive side of being in the moment, every time he saw his wife, he was overcome with love, as if it were the first time he saw her, because it was, as far as he knew, the first time he saw her. And he would say, "Oh, my dear, I'm so glad to see you. I've been in the middle of a void, like a coma, with nothing. I've been in nothing, nothing, nothing," because he didn't know where he was or why he was, and so each time he saw her, it was the first time. She would go to the bathroom, she'd leave his hospital room and come back. When she came back after a minute or less, "Oh, my dear, I'm so glad to see you. I haven't seen you in..." Now, that's the way I would like to be with my wife too. I've been married for 53 years, plus she was my girlfriend for a few years before that, plus we grew up together in New York City. So we were friends before we were girlfriends, so I still love her, but not like that, like, "Oh, my dear," not overcome with love, the way Clive was overcome with love. So from one point of view, I would love to have that relationship to my wife. I would love to have that relationship to the Appassionata Sonata of Beethoven, like as if I never heard it. And how amazing to listen to this music or experience this food, or as if it was the first time you ever had Cantonese chow mein, or, this is an amazing dish. Not that you've had it dozens and dozens of times, where it loses its specificity, it loses its novelty, it loses its the power of the impression of that food or of that person or of that anything. I would love to live a life where the moment was so energized that it just brought forth so much love and appreciation. But would I pay for it by having no past, by just having that little slice of the moment, but having no relationship to my wife, because we don't have a relationship? I mean, Clive, we don't have a past, so I don't know anything about her preferences. I don't know what food she likes to eat. I don't know what clothing she likes to wear. I could never buy a present for her because I don't know her really, except that I love her, and when she appears in front of me, it's overwhelming love. So would I pay for memory? Would I pay for having a view of my life that had a bit of a bay window type panorama? Would I be willing to pay for that by being locked into this moment? Probably not.
That's a pretty deep thing to say, a heavy thing to say to someone who's just trying to take a course.
Well, only if nothing else I said didn't persuade them that that being in the moment has its drawbacks. You could be so much in the moment. For example, the typical free improviser, I could name a bunch of them, is really in the moment when they play. Wonderful. You know, what did you just play 20 seconds ago? Is there any thematic connection? Is there any rhythmic? Is there any connection? Why are you still playing? Are you developing something? Or are you just flailing away at the piano? I don't really care, but sometimes I hear that there's no connection. You're just simply now. And now has become very popular. You know the Eckhart Tolle book, whatever it's called, Being in the Now. So a lot of people misunderstand that. They conflate being in the now with not having a view to a larger breadth of time. And it's hard to just be in the now, and actually compose a piece of music, because you have to remember what you did a minute ago.
I am fascinated by everything that you're saying, so I would love to also keep going, but I'm sure you have other things to do, so I will leave off that question because we probably already answered that. And
let me just say, I don't mind staying here. I don't mind whatever you have to ask, because I really enjoy your presence. You know, you have a way of talking and listening.
I appreciate it.
That is very stimulating, and that's what I mean. That's a talent, and you know, I think maybe, I don't know if you want to deny that, but not everybody can get people to talk.
Yeah, it's interesting that I always thought that my capacity to listen is like how you describe the negative space pulling in.
Exactly.
But I also have learned that it's not functional to just listen. Like, I have to actually say things, otherwise it feels monotonous.
Exactly.
So it's like I'm learning to actually talk and interrupt people and all of this.
Beautiful.
Which is a fascinating process.
I could amplify that with a story, but are we going to forget where we were?
I'm not going to try to go back, but I would just offer you if you wanted to ask me a question, because you said you wanted to ask me a question. But it can't be, why am I doing this? Because I've had that question too many times.
Because what?
Too many people ask me that question.
No. Well, I know why you're doing it, but I meant, you know, you're really interested in people. You're interested in your own process of living. Like, you know, you're always asking yourself, I think, not as a question, but as a motivating impulse, what's going on here? Like, you know, what are we doing here? And what are you doing here? And that might help me know what I'm doing here.
I like that.
But I do want to make a joke about, not me make a joke,
Go
but
ahead.
tell you something that really put me in my place about listening. One of my adult students from an Atkinson course that I was teaching at York, my first year or second year there, So the room was filled with adults, and they were mostly all teachers, but in any case, they were grown-ups. One of them was a teacher at Forest Hill Senior Public School, and he knew that I had a free improvisation group, and he said, I'd like to invite you to Forest Hill Public School to play a concert with your group. So we got there, and we were in a great mood, and being silly and ready to just let loose. And I thought I would just tell the kids a little bit about what we're going to do. And I realized I can't tell them anything because we don't know what we're going to do. So I was just trying to explain, we just listen and then play. And that didn't explain anything, but I didn't know what else to say. So as I turned around from the microphone and walked back to the band, Michael Snow, Michael Snow, Canadian
Piano improviser?
Yeah, Canadian artist. He's the guy who did the geese. Right? So he's heard me say that. We just listen. So he turned to the band and he said, "Okay, boys, start listening." And I realized that was so dumb what I said, because you can't listen unless somebody's doing something. It's just exactly what you said. Wow. So listening is half of what you do. The other thing is, what's your input into it? And the input has to be something genuine. So you have some genuine questions that come from genuine interests. In other words, it's not a job that you're performing a task to get this person to talk, but you have questions that you want to know this and you want to know this. And I think
from you specifically also, as opposed to just general questions.
Yeah, but then for each person you have questions, And as you said, you're like me. You're happy to be on your own for extended periods of time. So I'm not going to ask you, why do you do this? Not why do you ask the questions, but why mingle emotionally and intellectually with people who are otherwise strangers to you? You're trying to find out something about what motivates them to be what they are, to do what they do. And do people ever say things that are foreign to you, like where somebody says, well, I do this because this and this, and you go, oh God, I never did that? Or is everything that everybody says in response to that question familiar to you, even if it's oblique, even if it's not directly the reason you do what you do? Like, do you ever get something that just seems like, wow, that person is coming from outer space? I can't imagine being motivated by that. And yet, the questions you ask are so open-ended, both open-ended and they're just focused enough to get people to say something, but you have no idea what they're going to say. So do people ever
surprise me?
Yeah, like really?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I wouldn't, if I already knew what you were going to say, I might still come here and ask you questions, especially if I think what you would say would be interesting. It really depends on each person. I sometimes, you're quite an improviser, so I had no idea what you were going to say today or I didn't have too many questions for you, to be honest. So it really is, just seeing what happens, and then. But you're also mixing the traveling and the interview thing. Like, often when I'm interviewing people, I've done it with a stranger, like somebody who I haven't had much experience with, like maybe a few times, like 2 or 3 times tops. But even those times, I would say I hung out with them for half an hour beforehand,
right.
Just by chance. It wasn't like, oh, now we have to hang out before. It's just they needed to eat lunch or something, or they prepared me a lunch and we just chatted for a bit. So I haven't done this with a stranger, but in traveling, of course, I've met lots of strangers. I've stayed in strangers' houses, couch surfing, etc., and that feels very much like the cashier story you mentioned, where
Yeah.
you're just like, I feel enriched.
One of the TikTok things I've seen, I think it's TikTok, is when people just walk up to somebody and start something. The one I saw last night, and I showed it to my grandkids. I don't know exactly how he starts it, but he's got a couple of pillows. Have you ever seen that one? And he gives a pillow to somebody, and he has a pillow, and then he just whacks him over the head. And then, and if they get it, then he starts a pillow fight.
Right.
Never talked to them before. Just a pillow fight right in the middle of the street or, anywhere. And everybody's having a great time.
Yeah.
Nobody gets hurt because it's a soft pillow, but they really are whacking each other and having a great time being children again.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing I imagine you do or could do. Just kind of go up to somebody saying, not like, nice day, isn't it? But like, I don't know what you would say. But
yeah, I wish I had a shtick that wonderful.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah, this is like, honestly, I think you would do that much better. Because I'm more like, I just talk with people, I don't do this kind of strange clowny stuff. But,
Oh no, I don't mean that. I don't mean a pillow fight. I just mean, but talk to people without a half an hour warm up and just just broadside them, say, I don't know how to say what.
Again, I think you would do that exceptionally well, whether you're in a cashier, whether you're traveling. Like, I think that I would love to even see your version of that because I think there's so many.
Right. Well, I do it all the time, but
you do, but it's not recorded. Nobody sees it. So.
No. So I'll hang out with you and watch you do it.
Well, there's that also. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the encouragement. Yeah, I do want to get more. Actually, this project also, it was like, I did have an idea of trying to capture something about my travels and just the interesting strangers that I meet. And I did have the idea of just like walking up to people and just maybe asking them something, or even if I just heard somebody say something, then just ask them like, oh, could I record this, or do you want? So far, it hasn't really emerged yet because I've just done it in this more structured way. But at some point, I would like to do that.
You need some lead questions. Just walk up to somebody and say, "Can I ask you a question?"
Right.
And then, like whatever. Which do you think is bigger, the star or the moon?
Right.
They'll probably, hopefully say a star is bigger. But how do you know that? The star is so small and the moon is, right?
Again, I think this is totally this would be great to hear you. I would love to see you, watch you do that. I think it would be it would spread something really wonderful in our world if you did that. Yeah.
I'm sure you could do it. What's better, rice or noodles? Like beef with rice? Or are you a vegetarian? Oh, string beans with rice or string beans with noodles?
I'm from India, so obviously I'm going to say rice because rice is great.
Brown rice or white rice?
I like white rice, yeah.
Why? Brown rice is supposed to be healthier.
It's not a priority for me always, but I don't like to work when I'm eating. This is why I don't enjoy eating beef that's cooked too much, because then I have to chew a lot. I don't want to chew.
You have to use a knife.
I don't want to use a knife. I use only a spoon.
I love to eat just with a spoon too.
There you go. So we have a lot in common. Yeah.
But not because I'm lazy.
Well, you can be lazy. It's fine.
I just like eating with a spoon.
Yeah, but you can also be lazy. It's fine.
And I like also eating with chopsticks.
Yeah.
But a spoon is even better.
Yeah. Do you want to share anything before we finish?
Not really. I mean, I guess, if we went to get a beer together, there might be more to share, but...
Why don't we do that?
I don't drink.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. I do drink. I love to drink.
Yeah, I should also drink some water. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate you, Casey.
I appreciate your mind and your heart.
Likewise. Thank you. That was my extended conversation with Casey Sokol on strolling. If you enjoyed that, you might like my exchange with Bambo Davies for his clowning and collaboration through improv, or with Holger Krickel for his quirky observations on society and digital interactions, or with Jessica Böhmer for her experiments in social transformation and comfort moving between the spiritual and scientific. Find all this and more at strolling.rosano.ca. That's strolling.rosano.ca. See you next time, and thanks for listening.